As I've been traveling around this country as well as the continent, I'm appalled at how people just don't know about the African Union. So I've made it a mission to start every presentation by sharing with you the history of the African Union. The first ever known union of any African states was in 1958. This is soon after our colonial masters were giving up their colonies. France in particular gave its colonies two choices. You can be free with some attachments to France, or you can be free completely with no attachments to France at all. They did not fathom any African country that would want to be free with no attachments to France, but to their surprise, Guinea and Mali said, "No way, Jose, we want total liberation. Thank you, France. It's been wonderful, but go back home." Of course, the French, in their anger, they went in and took everything that they thought they had brought to Africa in those countries. They proceeded to pour concrete into the sewage pipes and completely devastated the two economies. The newly appointed president of Ghana, graduate of Lincoln University, thank you very much, in Pennsylvania. In his efforts to help these two economies, created the first ever known union of any African states, which was Ghana, Guinea, and Mali. A few years later, a few states met in Morocco, and a few more states met in Addis Ababa. By 1963, the Pan-African leaders of the time decided it was time that the Africans rebuilt and recreated that which was destroyed by our colonial masters, starting with the implementation of the rule of divide and conquer during the Berlin Conference of 1885. And this is when they sat down, pulled out the map of Africa, and mind you, that was after they had made a decision that the African kingdoms that they found in Africa were too powerful, too sophisticated, with educational systems and religious systems, that if those systems were maintained, the program of turning Africa into a truly dominated continent would not succeed. So then they started with their program to make sure that they are going to let the Africans believe that everything that is African is bad and inferior, and that everything that is Western is better and desirable. So by 1885, they were ready for implementation. And during the Berlin Conference of 1885, they would look at a humongous kingdom. The more powerful the kingdom was, the more countries that came out of it. The birth of small countries like Togo, Guinea, Mali was conceived. Let me take you back to a country like Burundi, a country like Rwanda during genocide. It's easy for us to be superficial and understand Africa from a superficial point of view. The issue of the Hutus and the Tutsis goes back to 1885, Berlin Conference. First, Rwanda was given to Germany. Then Germany turned around and gave it to Belgium. The Belgians came in and said, "Well, you Tutsis, your nasal bridges have a smaller angulation. They used rulers to measure their nasal bridges. The straighter your nasal bridge was, the more desirable you were." And so the divisions began. The Hutus were felt to be not as beautiful, and not well suited to serve the master, and the Tutsis were more desirable. Fast forward, the Catholic priests came in and said, well, you Hutus, do you not see what the Tutsis are doing to you? They're coming to get you because they think you are not as beautiful and as desirable as you should be. So it is that the divisions deepened. What we saw in 1994 was the tip of the iceberg. You often wonder who was funding all those machetes that were pumped into Rwanda during that 1 month. So it is. I could go on and on about some of the situations going on in Africa, but be it as it may, as I take on my challenge as the ambassador of the African Union, I can't help but find myself going back to the beginning. How did we, the Africans, get here? And also, furthermore, come to the realization that our journey is far from over, that the seeds that were planted by our colonial masters centuries ago are still alive and well. I don't know if some of you have heard of the situation at Cornell. There was an article where the African-American students were protesting against the continental African students and the Caribbean students, claiming that the continental Africans and the Caribbean students were receiving preferential treatments by the Ivy League schools and using them to fill the quota for black enrollment. They did not protest against the Asians. They did not protest against the lower percentage of black enrollment, but it was easier to go after my brother. It was easier to go after my sister. I couldn't help but be reminded that that seed has percolated through generations, which is why the status of black people today is what it is. But the real bigger issue as I face the challenge of rebuilding our Africa is the realization that quite often many of us are still deeply colonized. Our actions are colonized. Our thinking, our decision-making processes, when we sit across that boardroom table as a CEO with degrees from Harvard and all the big schools around the world, we're still making decisions for Africa with a colonized mind. We're still leading our Africa with a colonized mind. And yet, we don't even realize that our actions are colonized. So as an ambassador, I wonder, where do I begin? Garbage in, garbage out. You look at the exploitation that's going on in Africa today. Some things are just as simple to say, why can't the Africans just fix this? Why can't we pick up a brick from point A to point B successfully in a straight line? But no, we got to go to Honolulu and Timbuktu before we can take this brick right here. The legacy of colonialism. Over the years, we have seen masses, millions of Africans leave Africa for various reasons. Wars, in search of greener pastures. The brain drain that has occurred in Africa to date makes the issue of developing and building the Africa we want mission impossible. There are more doctors, Ghanaian doctors in New York City than in all of Ghana. There are more doctors out of Nigeria in New York City than in Nigeria itself. So the brain drain that has been going on for years must be reversed. How do we go about doing it? It's not easy to just say, African diaspora, please, go back home. Go back home where? And live a life that's nowhere near what I'm used to. And yet our Africa, with all its wealth, the richest continent on earth, the continent that still has 80%, upwards of 80% of its natural resources still intact. the continent that the West world, not strategic planning process that goes on without Africa at the center, because everything and anything the West needs can be found in Africa. I was in a meeting today and we were talking about elections in the DRC. And I remember my brother from DRC saying, well, we got to get some money. We need help we need some money to help us organize elections. And even after he finished talking, I thought to myself, DRC is one of the richest countries in Africa. And I'm sitting here, and the DRC cannot come up with enough money to hold elections. Such is our reality in Africa. There is something terribly wrong with that picture. So when I analyze what Africa has to offer, talk about the minerals, check, we got that. Talk about the oil, check, we got that. The sun, solar, we got that. The best solar on earth. The only thing we have left to really complete the puzzle of what Africa needs are its diaspora and Friends of Africa. You see, 1963, when Kwame Nkrumah came along with the Pan-African leaders, he made one proclamation. He said, you're not African because you were born in Africa, but rather, you are African because Africa is born in you. I know many who may have been born in Africa who are not Africans. And I also equally know many who may never have set foot in Africa who are very much Africans. I know many who have left Africa with suitcases chock full of humility, honor, and goodwill. But I equally know many who went to Africa with suitcases full of greed. I do know that between the African diaspora and the Friends of Africa who have Africa born in them, Africa is rich. And with a proper strategic plan in place, Africa can take its rightful place on the world stage. But it's going to come with the world speaking with one voice and saying, enough is enough. The exploitation that's going on in Africa must stop, and it must stop now. The world coming together and saying the corruption that's going on in Africa and into Africa must equally stop, because as long as the corruption is going on, we are fetching water with a leaking bucket. That's not an environment that investors want to come to. The land of milk and honey, that is our Africa. The land that is really a gift to the world. Some of you may not realize it, but when the world was one, when the world was Pangaea, the original map, I don't know how many of you know of Pangaea. That is our earth. That is the original map. So Africa belongs to all of us. Life began in Africa. But we must treat our Mother Africa fairly. Manage her resources fairly. Treat her fairly. Let's share our Africa fairly, without one exploiting the other. One of the missions I have in my position is to pave the way for not only the diaspora, but Friends of Africa who have Africa on their mind, to go and join hands with us in building not only the Africa that we love, but the Africa that we need and the Africa that we want. Tremendous opportunities in education, healthcare, private sector development, energy, infrastructure development, you name it, opportunities are everywhere. But quite often I know many investors who have gone to Africa who have lost money. I know many investors who have gone to Africa and did not realize the dream that they went out to get. Well, I have a responsibility to make sure that no more. Because people of goodwill, people who have Africa on their mind, must go to Africa and realize that which Africa has to offer. And we as Africans have a responsibility to make sure that we welcome you and pave the way for you and give you the right partnerships. So when you invest in Africa, the return on your investment is what you are expecting. But in return, you are also investing in the people of Africa. Let's take, for example, healthcare. If all the African diaspora doctors were to go back today, we're only going to meet 10% of the need. So no matter what we do, capacity building is what Africa needs. So that means projects in healthcare galore. So we have decided to embark on a program to truly rebuild our Africa from the ground, and paving the way for the African diaspora and Friends of Africa to participate in the development of Africa. Currently, we have a plan to build 5 diaspora villages. Each village is going to be in one region, which will be a growth point for that region. It's going to have, starting out with a 1,000-bed hospital. Thank goodness, President of Zambia has stepped up to the plate and given us 132 acres of land, and there is more. On the Zambian side of Victoria Falls, prime location to start to build this village. There's going to be a pharmaceutical manufacturing plant. I don't know how many of you know, but over 50% of drugs going into Africa today have zero bioavailability. That corruption I was talking about again. People are dying thinking they're taking diabetic medications, high blood pressure medications, antibiotics. It happened to me. Sometimes when I travel, my legs swell. So I usually have my Lasix with me. This time I forgot my Lasix. I was in Ghana. So my husband and his friends said, oh, there's a pharmacy around the corner. I normally take only 20 milligrams. But they brought me a little thing with 40 milligram tablets. I'm like, 40 milligrams, that's too strong. But the little pill was so small, I said, okay, I'll just take it. This one time. No response. Normally I would take 20 milligrams of Lasix, I'll be in the bathroom for 4 hours. So the following day I said to my husband, my legs are still swollen. We gotta do something. And his friend said, well, you know, I don't know how many of you have gone to Ghana, but there's this beautiful hotel called Movenpick. It's a 5-star hotel, just fantastic place. He said, well, we heard that if you really want real medicine, you go to Movenpick. So sure enough, they went to Movenpick and got me a 20 milligram Lasix. I was in the bathroom for 6 hours. It is a serious problem. So we are going to have pharmaceutical manufacturing plant in order to begin to address that issue. We'll also have 5-star hotels for health tourism and a university. And of course, agriculture is big in anything that we do. So there's going to be, our land is already, we have been told it will be, we'll be given more land because there will be serious agricultural projects going on there. And of course, the infrastructure that goes along and the power, the energy projects that come along. I'm saying this to say everything that's going to be done in that village can be duplicated millions of times over in the entire continent because there is need. Huge, tremendous need. My responsibility is to see to it that those who have Africa on their mind, I pave the way for them to go to Africa and have a heck of a good time. But more importantly, partnering those Friends of Africa with the African diaspora is a marriage that is destined to succeed. So while I am doing the politicking that I don't understand, that I attempt to try to understand, but I'm certainly not afraid to roll my sleeves and go to work and do what it takes to help build that Africa that we want and help the Africans come together. Birds sing not because they can, but because they have a song. The Africans have a song. Along with their friends of Africa, we hope to join hands and give the world the best melody the world has ever heard. In unison, as children of one Mother Africa, those born in Africa and those with Africa born in them. Because I do know one thing for sure, that if we come together and speak with one voice, Africa will make it to the promised land someday. Thank you.